You stand in a crowded room during a heated discussion, or scroll through a social media feed filled with furious consensus, and a strange cold tightness grips your chest. Everyone around you repeats the exact same slogan, nodding in mechanical agreement, looking to see who is not clapping. You have a quiet doubt rising in your throat, a realization that the room has gone mad, but instead of speaking up, you swallow the thought, force a smile, and nod along. We tell ourselves that keeping the peace matters more than making a scene, and that we're just playing along for now. But when we look back at 1930s Germany, we prefer a comfortable fairy tale. We picture an entire nation of cartoonish monsters, or 60 million people suddenly hypnotized by a single speaker on a balcony. We imagine that if we had lived in Berlin in 1933, we would have stood up and fought for justice. But ordinary Germans who supported the regime were school teachers, accountants, shopkeepers, and mothers. They loved their children and fed stray animals. They succumbed to universal human psychological mechanisms, the need for order, the pressure of conformity, and the relief of surrendering personal responsibility. Blaming monsters provides a psychological cope. It allows us to ignore our own fragile nature and the way our prefrontal cortex disengages when we are trapped in prolonged economic or social terror. In 1923, Germany suffered hyperinflation so catastrophic that workers were paid in wheelbarrows of cash that became worthless by evening. A single loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People burned their life savings in stoves just to keep their apartments warm. By 1929, the Great Depression left 6 million Germans unemployed. Men who fought in the trenches of World War I stood in breadlines for days, watching their families freeze. When a human being is trapped in prolonged economic terror, they stop caring about abstract constitutional rights or parliamentary debate. They crave one thing above all else: relief. This creates the escape from freedom. True freedom carries a heavy burden. It requires you to make your own choices and take total responsibility for your failures. When life becomes overwhelming, totalitarianism offers a seductive alternative. The Nazi Party won votes by promising jobs, cheap cars, subsidized vacations, and an end to economic humiliation. They offered a transactional contract to a traumatized population: give us your political freedom, and we will give you order, bread, and national pride. When a nation is drowning in chaos, the leader who promises absolute certainty will always outcompete the nuanced politician who admits that real solutions take time. To understand why ordinary citizens turned a blind eye to the suffering of their neighbors, we have to look at Gleichschaltung, the total coordination of daily civilian life. Every local choir, chess club, and trade union was forced to either adopt racial exclusion rules or be dissolved. Most ordinary Germans joined the party to keep their jobs or stay in their social circles. They signed the loyalty oaths and told themselves it was just a piece of paper that didn't change who they were inside. But the mind cannot tolerate the tension of performing acts that contradict its private values. To reduce this distress, the brain performs a psychological adjustment. You gradually change your private values to match your public actions. Social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this pressure in 1951. He placed a participant in a room with 7 actors who were secretly instructed to give the same wrong answer about the length of simple lines on a card. The correct answer was glaringly obvious. Over 75% of participants conformed to the group's obvious lie at least once. When interviewed afterward, many admitted they saw the correct line, but gave the wrong answer because they could not bear the social discomfort of being the lone voice of disagreement in the room. In 1930s Germany, that discomfort carried lethal stakes. Refusing to raise your arm for the salute at a bakery meant risking your job, your social standing, and a visit from the Gestapo. Public performative compliance eventually rewrites the conscience to justify the status quo. The regime dissolved trust at the atomic level. Through the blocklighter system, the party assigned a warden to every residential building to monitor who attended rallies and who failed to hang a swastika flag. Your neighbor was a potential informant. If you made a joke about the party in the stairwell, your neighbor might report you to demonstrate their own loyalty. This environment facilitates the agentic shift. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted experiments to see how ordinary people could participate in systemic murder. He instructed participants to deliver increasingly severe electric shocks to a learner in another room whenever they answered incorrectly. The shock generator was clearly marked danger, severe shock. As the shocks increased, the learner screamed in agony and eventually went silent. But when the experimenter calmly said, "The experiment requires that you continue," 65% of ordinary citizens flipped the switch anyway. They stopped viewing themselves as autonomous moral agents and began viewing themselves as instruments carrying out the will of an authority. This is the banality of evil. When Adolf Eichmann stood trial in 1961, observers were stunned to find a bland, terrifyingly ordinary bureaucrat. He was motivated by administrative efficiency and a desire to perform his job well. His crime was a total inability to think from the perspective of another human being. We see this in Reserve Police, Battalion 101, a unit of middle-aged working-class men ordered to execute thousands of Jewish civilians in Poland. When given the choice to step out of line without punishment, over 80% chose to participate in mass murder anyway. They pulled the trigger simply to avoid letting down their military peers or appearing weak. In bureaucratic systems, responsibility is diffused. One clerk stamps a form, another schedules a train, another guards a gate. No single individual feels personally responsible for the final atrocity. Everyone is just doing their small part. Many professionals who loathed the regime adopted inner emigration. They withdrew from public life, immersed themselves in poetry or music, and told themselves they were preserving their moral purity. Yet their daily work and tax payments continued to fuel the war machine. Silent intellectual purity is a tragic self-deception in a system that requires total coordination. On a national scale, this created a massive bystander effect. During events like Kristallnacht, millions watched their neighbors' shops being destroyed. Because everyone else stood silent, each individual felt their personal responsibility diluted to zero. Everyone assumed that if this were truly an emergency, someone else, the church or the international community, would stop it. After 1945, millions of Germans claimed we knew nothing about it. While the technical details of death camps were secrets, the public deportations and confiscated property were visible to everyone. The claim of ignorance served as a psychological shield, protecting their self-worth from the devastating realization of their own complicity. Standing silent when you know atrocity is happening is never neutrality. In a totalitarian system, passive silence is a form of active collaboration. These mechanisms operate in every modern corporate office and digital community. The fear of being targeted by a social swarm causes the majority to fall silent, allowing extreme voices to dominate the narrative. History is not a trophy case of dead mistakes. It reflects the choices we make when group pressure mounts in our own lives. We revere figures like Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement today, but in their own time they were branded dangerous subversives and traitors. Real courage does not ask for applause, and it does not wait for a majority vote. It begins when you decide that truth is worth more than social comfort. Resisting the agentic shift requires active training. It means recognizing the physical pain of social isolation shown in the Ask experiments and deciding to endure it. If 65% of people will deliver a lethal shock because an authority figure tells them to, you are only the exception if you consciously practice the habit of dissent. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control. It is the knowledge that, regardless of external pressure or group expectation, your choices belong entirely to you. You decide what you believe based on evidence, accepting the discomfort of standing alone. True freedom is the unshakable internal clarity to be the one voice in a room willing to say no when everyone else is nodding. Examine the consensus of your social circle, question the official narratives, and inhabit your life with quiet courage. Build your own mind first, then choose wisely.